Hi and welcome back to another video. We are 5 weeks from Election Day here, October 1st. Finally have entered the month of October. And in this video, I want to talk about the state of Pennsylvania. One of, if not the most important battleground states in this 2024 election cycle. 19 electoral college votes at stake. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump both pouring tremendous resources into the state, and for good reason. In this video, I want to go through Pennsylvania's trends, just taking a look at the historical trends in the state, and then obviously diving into the numbers as it stands right now. Again, 5 weeks until Election Day, and just talk about how important this state is. Spoiler alert. It's very important for either candidate to carry the state of Pennsylvania. So let's start by taking a look back at Pennsylvania's election history. Since 2000, Pennsylvania's only voted for a Republican presidential candidate once, and that was in 2016. Trump's nearly a little less than 1-point victory in the state over Hillary Clinton. It flipped back into the Democrats' column in 2020, voting for Joe Biden by a little over a point. But you can see here just the trends for Pennsylvania. Historically blue state since 2000. But again, some tight numbers with some trends that had indicated it could go in the Republicans' favor eventually. And again, Trump did take that state in 2016. And just to put that into context, when I say trends, here's Pennsylvania's history versus the national popular vote margin. In yellow, you'll see the popular vote, where the nation voted. So, just to kind of summarize this chart, you see that from 2000 to 2012, Pennsylvania voted significantly at times to the left of the national popular vote. But you saw from 2000 to 2012 that margin shrinking. And in 2012, while it did vote to the left of the nation, that margin was very small. And in 2016, Donald Trump was able, like I said, to carry that state. And it was the first time since 2000 that the state voted to the right of the nation, a trend that continued in 2020 as Pennsylvania did vote fairly significantly to the right of the national popular vote. Even though it did vote for Joe Biden in 2020, it voted fairly significantly to the right of the nation. And you can see that even further here. In 2016, Pennsylvania voting about 3 points, 2.8 points to the right of the national popular vote. In 2020, that number increased. It voted 3 points, 3.3 points to the right of the national popular vote. I also dropped in pins here for the states of Michigan and Wisconsin, the Rust Belt counterparts to Pennsylvania. You'll often see these three states grouped together in what's been coined the Blue Wall area or Upper Rust Belt area. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin kind of get lumped together in that Upper Rust Belt trio. And you see here Pennsylvania voted pretty much in line with Wisconsin, but to the right of Michigan in 2016, and to the left of Wisconsin, but to the right of Michigan in 2020. So Pennsylvania, a state that we expect to vote to the right of Michigan this election cycle, but whether it votes to the left, to the right, or straight in line with Wisconsin, that's yet to be determined. I'd expect it to vote fairly in line with Wisconsin. I'd say probably less than a percentage point difference in either direction this election cycle, which makes it very, very interesting to watch when we get into scenarios for either candidate that could get them to 270. Do we assume that Wisconsin votes to the right of Pennsylvania, meaning that if Pennsylvania goes into Trump's column, do we also assume that Wisconsin follows suit? Or do we think that we'll see a trend reversal here where Pennsylvania is to the right of Wisconsin? There are some numbers indicating that that could be a case. Polling certainly has been friendlier to Donald Trump in Pennsylvania than it has been in Wisconsin. So do we see a situation where Pennsylvania could vote for Trump and not Wisconsin or Michigan? And obviously with Pennsylvania being carried by Kamala Harris, would that spell bad things in Wisconsin and Michigan as well? Or is Wisconsin still a safety net for Donald Trump in the event of a tight loss in Pennsylvania? Last thing I wanted to touch on in regards to history is county consistency. In saying that, you'll see the map in front of you, the county map of Pennsylvania. All the counties in red are counties that voted for Donald Trump back in 2016 and in 2020. All counties in blue voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and Joe Biden in 2020. Only two counties, Erie County and Northampton County, flipped in either direction. In this case, they both flipped from Republican to Democrat in 2016 to 2020. They're the only two counties that voted differently in those two election cycles. So, and just to dive in even further here into the county map, Philadelphia County down here has its surrounding counties, its suburb counties, are where the Democrats hope to grab the most votes in the state, whereas the Republicans are hoping to pick off some of these smaller counties throughout the state and again make headway in these suburban, in these Philadelphia suburb counties. Northampton County, an indication in 2020 that Donald Trump was going to lose the state, as there was some more headway being made in the suburbs from the Democrats. So counties to watch, again, any of these around Philadelphia, you want to take a look at Center County, county that houses State College, Allegheny County, Pittsburgh. But if you want to take a look at some teller counties, some indicator counties, that would be Northampton County and Erie County. Will they flip back into the Republican column? That could indicate a better night in Pennsylvania for Donald Trump, whereas if they stay in the Democratic column, perhaps a better night for Kamala Harris. Well, history aside, let's take a look at the 2024 election cycle, in particular the polling numbers, the polling trends. Now, at the time of Joe Biden's withdrawal, much like in almost all of these battleground states, Donald Trump held a fairly significant lead over the sitting president. But since then, since Kamala Harris's entrance into the race, it's been a lot tighter. And I don't think you could get tighter polling-wise, and you certainly can't when you look at the other battleground states. This has been the tightest polling state in the nation, just based on jockeying for position. At the time of the first debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, polls were dead even. A week later, Donald Trump up by 0.2 of a point. A week after that, Kamala Harris up by about 0.5 point. And today, as we sit here on October 1st, Donald Trump leads in the polls, in the average of polls. This, I'm using Real Clear Politics average of polls. If you want a source for that, we'll link that in the description below. Donald Trump leads by 0.1 of a point. It's as tight as you can get in terms of polling. Here's something I dove into a little bit numerically, just to go beyond the polls and to show something that could make a difference. And again, I'm going to put this link in the description below. Voter registration changes party to party. That means people that were registered Democrats or independents that changed their party affiliation to Republican, or Republicans, independents that changed party affiliation to Democrat. And I did this for the last for the last two election cycles, and then this election cycle now. So from 2013, after the 2012 election, to 2016, you see the edge, and Republicans have had an edge in all three of these columns. But I just wanted to show something that I thought was interesting, because the disparity here leading into the 2016 election was fair in favor of the Republicans in an election cycle that Donald Trump ended up taking the state of Pennsylvania. Now, leading into the 2020 election cycle, that number was just not as significant. It was fairly close. It was fairly immaterial in terms of party switch. And that was an election that went to the Democrats and Joe Biden in the state of Pennsylvania. And here, leading into the 2024 election from 2021, you see the stark difference in these numbers. Republicans with an overwhelming edge in changes over the Democrat Party. And this is just something that raised my eyebrows, that's something I'm looking at when you want to see why polling numbers and why it looks like Pennsylvania is shifting a little more to the right than, say, its Rust Belt counterparts of Wisconsin and Michigan. I wanted to dive in a little bit as to why that was the case, and this could very well be a reason, an underlying factor here, and that's party affiliation changes. Now, obviously, you can't just assume that every registered Republican will vote for Donald Trump and every registered Democrat for Kamala Harris, and you can't just assume that the reason Democrats are changing their party affiliation to Republican are to vote for Donald Trump, or that Donald Trump is the reason at all for that change. So these are just assumptions that, we just can't make. All we can do is look at the numbers and see if they tell a story. And at least leading up to 2016, those numbers were a little stark in an election that Donald Trump did win in the state. Not as stark in 2020, an election that Joe Biden won in the state. They're fairly stark here. So, again, I'm not trying to spell doom for the Kamala Harris campaign here. I'm just looking at these numbers, and these numbers raised an eyebrow to me just based on how stark the difference was heading into this election cycle. But in the event that Donald Trump does take the state of Pennsylvania, is this a trend that we look to in 2028? Is this something that are these numbers worth following? Or are these just numbers spurned by other factors that have nothing or little to do with how the state will vote? These are just things when we analyze any bit of data in election cycles that we have to look at. So with all that being said, how important is the state of Pennsylvania to the candidate's chances of winning the election? I think the best way to analyze that is by saying, okay, what is their path if they lose the state? So let's look at Kamala Harris's best path if she loses in the state of Pennsylvania. Well, it'll start in Nevada with its 6 electoral votes. Nevada's a state that voted for the Democrats in the last 2 election cycles, voted for Hillary Clinton, voted for Donald Trump. It is the only one of the 7 battleground states that voted Democrat in both election cycles. It is also a state where, as of October 1st, Kamala Harris leads in the polls by about 1.5 points. So it starts in Nevada, and it goes to Michigan, a state that, again, in the upper Rust Belt, votes to the left of both Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. It is a state that holds 15 electoral votes. and it is a state that she currently leads in polling by about 1.5 points. So again, in Kamala Harris's case, when she loses, if she loses in Pennsylvania, those are states that she needs to take right off the bat. Now, her best chance in general, or her easiest path in general, involves holding the quote-unquote blue wall, the upper Rust Belt trio of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. If she holds Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, no matter how she performs with the other 4 battleground states, she has enough to win the presidential election. So her simplest path is to hold those 3 states. So in the event that that wall cracks in Pennsylvania, she needs to hold the other 2, and that is Michigan and Wisconsin. Wisconsin and its 10 electoral college votes, currently she leads in polls there by a little less than a point. And again, it's a state that would need to vote, in this case, to the left of Pennsylvania in the event that Pennsylvania goes into Donald Trump's column. It is a state that will need to vote to the left of Pennsylvania, and that would be the first time it does so in the last 3 election cycles, as it voted in line with Pennsylvania in 2016 and to the right of Pennsylvania in 2020. And then to close it, again, this is without winning Pennsylvania, she would need to pick off one of North Carolina and Georgia. And I say pick off because Donald Trump currently leads in polls in both of those states, though they're both very, very tight. And they're both states, Georgia is a state that Joe Biden won in 2020. So to say pick off is not exactly accurate, but she would need to take one of these 2 states. Now, in the event that Wisconsin continues its trend and votes to the right of Pennsylvania, so Donald Trump wins in Pennsylvania and he wins in Wisconsin, Kamala Harris would need both North Carolina and Georgia. And again, these are all very tight in the polls. They're all very close, and a demographic shift that is different. So in the event that she loses in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, she would need both North Carolina and Georgia, or one of North Carolina and Georgia, and add Arizona into this mix. Taking a look at Donald Trump's best path with a loss in Pennsylvania. Now, a loss in Pennsylvania for Donald Trump, the biggest thing it does is keep the blue wall alive for Kamala Harris. And again, that path is the simplest and most effective one for her to get to 270 electoral college votes. So in the event where he loses in Pennsylvania, and the situation and the scenario of him losing in Wisconsin and Michigan is still alive, that just shows how important Pennsylvania would be to Donald Trump. So, a loss in Pennsylvania, how does he need to proceed? Well, he'd need to win North Carolina and Georgia. Those are prerequisites in almost every path, every legitimate path for Donald Trump's chances to get to 270. He currently leads in both polling averages, and they're both states that are historically more red. North Carolina, a state that voted for him twice back in 2016 and in 2020, so a state that he would need to hold right off the bat. Moving on from that, he would need to take Arizona back, a state that he won in 2016, lost in 2020, and a state that he's currently leading in the polls by almost 2 points. He'd need to take that state, and then we go back to the blue wall. Even with the loss in Pennsylvania, the fact of the matter still remains: Donald Trump would need to break into that blue wall, and his next best chance to do so would be in Wisconsin, a state again that voted to the right of Pennsylvania in 2020, and a state that he currently trails in the polls, but by less than a percentage point. So his best chance, having lost Pennsylvania, would need to be in Wisconsin. Again, a loss in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania would spell doom for the Trump campaign in general. So just to put a bow on this, I was asked I was asked two things. I was asked, how important is Pennsylvania? That's what prompted me to make this video. How important is Pennsylvania? And is it more important for Donald Trump or for Kamala Harris? Well, the answer to the first question is easy. It's very important. It is perhaps the most important, I would say the most important, of the battleground states in this presidential election. Now, is it more important for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? I mean, we could have a debate on that, and I hope you guys do have a debate on that in the comments section below. But it's a little more complicated. So again, we go back to the scenarios with a loss in Pennsylvania. If Kamala Harris loses in Pennsylvania, she has a couple of things to overcome. The first one being that Pennsylvania tends to vote to the left of its counterpart Wisconsin and the Sun Belt states of Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona. So if those trends continue, a loss in Pennsylvania could lead to some not so great things elsewhere in the battlegrounds for Kamala Harris. So trends definitely say that Kamala Harris does not want to lose the state of Pennsylvania. The bigger reason, though, is that a loss in Pennsylvania means that scenario, that simple scenario of the blue wall, well, that goes away, and she's going to need to get to 270 some other way, a little more complicated than just holding those three states. Now, for Donald Trump, the state of Pennsylvania, obviously an important one, because a loss there keeps that scenario alive, and he'd need to rely very, very strongly on Wisconsin, because a loss in Pennsylvania pretty much guarantees a loss in Michigan. And that leaves his only lifeline in the entire map of battlegrounds in Wisconsin. So Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, put those all on the back burner. Put them all in the back of your mind. All eyes are on Wisconsin, and all his chips are on that one battleground state. A state that, again, he trails in the polls right now, and a state that's been very, very close, particularly the last two election cycles. So a loss in Pennsylvania means all chips on Wisconsin, and that's just not a scenario you want to be in as a presidential candidate, where all your hopes hinge on one single state. And that's the scenario he would find himself in if he loses in the state of Pennsylvania. So who stands to benefit or lose more from a win/loss in Pennsylvania? Take your pick. I want to win this state if I'm either campaign. If you came back from, let's say, November 6th, and you time traveled back to me now, and you only gave me one bit of information, and that's the winner of the state of Pennsylvania in this election, I would put all my money on that candidate having won the presidential election. I believe that whoever wins the state of Pennsylvania wins this presidential election. I put the percentage for either candidate having won the state of Pennsylvania in the 80%, 85% range. I just can't see many scenarios where either candidate lose the state of Pennsylvania and still win this presidential election. Now, we laid out the scenarios, and they're very, very plausible scenarios. However, they're not more plausible than winning Pennsylvania and then going from there and winning the presidential election. That's why I say Pennsylvania is the most important state in this election cycle. Who benefits more? Put me on the spot right now. I'd say Donald Trump benefits more from winning Pennsylvania than Kamala Harris would, just based on the fact that a win in Pennsylvania probably makes the rest of the battleground map look a lot more a lot redder than a loss in Pennsylvania would. So I do think that a little bit more pressure on the Trump campaign in the state of Pennsylvania. And again, when it comes down to it, a lot of the trends are favoring the Republicans in that state. So a loss there would just be a little bit of a deflation for the Republican Party in a state that they've made a lot of headway in. And again, I hate to reiterate it one more time, but I will. If Pennsylvania goes blue again, it keeps alive that scenario for Kamala Harris where she holds on to those 3 blue wall states and reaches 270 electoral votes en route to being named president-elect. So, with that being said, we'll put an end to this video. The state of Pennsylvania, spoiler alert, right? Important in this 2024 election cycle. If you like this video, leave it a like. Comment below any of your thoughts. Hit the subscribe button. Try to do another state of the race video as we get closer to election day. Next week will be a month until election day, so we're getting into that final stretch. We're gonna have a lot more of a clearer picture in terms of polling, and I definitely want to take a look at that. We'll start getting some early voting data in as well. We'll start to take a look at that as well. But yeah, enjoy the election cycle. It's getting more and more interesting by the day. Leave a like, subscribe, and have a good one.